All right. Well, I'm excited to turn it over to the team who's been working really hard on a variety of activities under the grant. And yeah, I think first up we have Lisa Schluter. Join the news desk.
I think it might be a little easier if Kirsten have arms. Good morning. One more slide, please. So we're very pleased to announce that we hosted the first Ruths Event, which is a curriculum and training developed by Sarah Watamura out of DU. And we had this in Glenwood Springs. There were about 15 ECM professionals in attendance. It was very well received. The training is around trauma-informed care, but also looks at workforce retention with the idea of supporting, buffering, and offering additional skills to those who are on the front line, helping providers and families. We have 2 more events in September. They are already completely full, and we are looking forward to having similar responses. We will be sharing out evaluation information when it becomes available.
Thank you.
All right, I am Julie Becker, and I work in home visiting, and just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on our project. We know that there's decades of national research showing that evidence-based home visiting programs have good outcomes for parents and children when provided to families. Those outcomes include nurturing caregiving increases, decreases in harsh discipline, increases in school readiness. What we don't know is if this is sort of a program that we could then use for people who are providing care to kids. And so we are sort of doing a pilot to find that out. And so we are serving folks who are providing licensed family child care, home care, as well as friend, family, neighbor care. And we are providing home visiting to those folks. There are 5 entities that are working with their communities and providing those home visiting services. And the goal is really to see if that it will be a strategy that can improve the care for Colorado kids and also empower providers to build some of their skills. So national pilots for home visiting with child care providers have documented improvements in provider and parent relationships as parents begin to see those providers as teachers versus babysitters. And then we know in Colorado there's quite great gains on BRAC school readiness scores for kids from the time that they start a home visiting program until 9 months or a year later when they get tested again compared to their same age peers. So our 5 agencies got their contracts in February, and it's a pretty small amount of funding, but they are all sort of up and running. By mid-July, the agencies were serving 21 child care providers and 85 children. Some agencies have met their recruitment targets very easily. Some are still struggling. And so it's sort of a range. But some of the things that we're seeing is a lot of things are varying widely by sites. So how they're doing the work is varying, and we sort of are okay with that because that will help us figure out what works. So there's one site, for example, where they are seeing child care providers outside of child care hours. So they meet on Tuesday nights with one group, they meet on Saturday nights with another group, and their engagement has been off the charts. So it's a time for those providers to then meet with other providers, there's social connections. They've been very excited with the curriculum. Actually, all of the curriculum that we're providing by the national models has been sort of augmented for childcare. And these providers have been like, but it looks like we're missing some things. We want all the curriculum. So I think there's some excitement about it. And we're really excited to sort of evaluate it. Our evaluation, because it's a pretty small line in this budget, but our evaluation will essentially be looking at child outcomes, looking at the BRAC school readiness assessment pre and post, and seeing if kids are changing where they are in comparison to their same age peers. And then there will also be a survey for providers asking things like, did this increase their ability to provide nurturing caregiving? Did this increase relationships with their families? And a variety of other kind of topics. And that's kind of how we'll judge, I guess, the success of this pilot, to figure out if it makes sense, and with the needs assessment, if it makes sense to continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a brief overview about,
Oh, do we want to make sure we're introducing ourselves too?
yeah, Aveline Rodriguez, Coordination and Alignment Manager for Kindergarten Transitions for PDG. And I did want to include an overview of what PDG is asking for kindergarten transitions, and then just mention some of the activities that we're planning through. So PDG calls out increasing engagement in system-wide transition planning. This is a required deliverable for the grant. So we recognize in our office that there are transitions through different stages, as Carrie Gumroth is going to mention, through the ELDGs. But for PDG specifically, we are focusing on preschool to kindergarten transition. And I'm probably preaching to the choir, but we know that more transition practices allow for better social, emotional, and cognitive skills to develop for children. So we're using the language of creating smooth transitions for children. So the grant is intended to ensuring strong connections within the mixed delivery system. So identifying activities to address this, determine the supports and the gaps for transitions. So we have already learned through conversations and meetings and surveying folks across our states that there are pockets throughout Colorado where folks are doing great things with transitions, both community providers and schools. So really recording that and trying to scale those as best practices as we move forward. And the next slide. Oh, so our three really main ingredients for successful transitions are making sure our families and children, providers, our communities as a whole have access to information, supporting all of these individuals, and as well as aligning, between these environments, which we know we're not exactly there yet for the third one, but some of our findings are really helping us develop these plans for the state. So not only with our initial survey, which I will speak to in the next slide, but also analyzing what is to come through the needs assessment. We're really excited to have that inform our next steps. So some activities that we've done in regards to kindergarten transitions so far, just in the last couple months. In June, we held our 6th annual Early Childhood Summit, and this year's topic was called On the Move, Supporting the Transition Process for Children and Families. This was moderated by Professor Beth Rouse, who is an expert in her field for transitions. And we gathered around 125 participants, representative across the mixed delivery system, where we really, Beth really gathered us together to create a transition plan to how to better engage families. So we're excited to have a follow-up from this summit, so stay tuned because there will be a part 2. We also had an initial survey that went out to providers.
To the webinar you have entered as
to providers within the mixed delivery system. So we're currently analyzing those findings, which are really exciting to hear from people. We're partnering through PDG, we've already partnered with the Growing Readers Together through the state library to help, print some more of those early literacy calendars, which are so awesome. And then hoping to scale those as well as we continue. Creating a resource for informal care providers. So we're trying to create what we're calling the playbook for FFN providers and recognizing them as a parent choice, right? Developing a school readiness marketplace where all of this information could live on our OEC website. And then engaging with the National P3 Center, so working with Christy Cowers, who is an expert, a national expert in transitions, and really using her framework to help inform us on a systems level if we want transitions to work statewide. How do we engaged, with legislation and with other partnerships and philanthropy. So she'll be helping us inform our plan. So we're really excited where we've come so far. Yeah. And I don't know if there's questions. So for us, it's So the question was, is P for preschool or prenatal? So the Office of Early Childhood, we recognize P for prenatal. Yeah.
There's a question on there too about where can we see the webinar afterwards in the slides. This is Christina, and I always send out the webinar. We also post it both on the ECLC's website and the OEC's website under the Preschool Development Grant work. And we do put the slides up on the ECLC's website. So we'll make sure to send all those links out after the webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome, Karen.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to give a quick update on the Retooling Project and just to kind of highlight what we're focused on here. Go to the next slide. Our goals for this project are to move from the ERS-R tools to the ERS-3 tools, in particular for programs who are serving infants, toddlers, preschoolers within child care centers. And we had a few questions actually in the community about where we are with doing this for the family child care providers. And so I will get to that in a second, but right now we're focused on centers. And our goals here, right now we're working on training coaches across the state, getting them certified here by the end of the year. We will then start training rating assessors and making sure they're reliable before we launch, hopefully. Our goal is July 2020. So our expected outcomes are the implementation of the 3 tools by July 2020, and then the implementation of the 3 tools for family child care homes by July 2021. And the reason there is a delay in that is that basically we haven't been able to get the ERS Tool 3 for family child care homes. It's just been released in August by the authors. It actually is in production right now. We've even had a little bit of a challenge getting the actual physical book because there's backlogs for that. So please don't misunderstand that we're moving forward with centers and not prioritizing homes. It's strictly because the tool has not been ready for us to implement. So we'll have to do the same thing when the ERS 3 tool comes out for the family child care homes. We'll have to do coach training, and we'll have to do reliability training for folks. So if we can do it faster, we will. So thanks for understanding that. So our progress to date, we have scheduled 16 trainings across the state. We've already had trainings in Denver. We've had trainings in Glenwood Springs. We've had trainings in Morgan, Dolores, Pueblo scheduled next week, and we'll have additional Denver trainings coming up. We've got 120 coaches out of our 200 expected trainees trained in both tools at this point in time. So we are moving ahead pretty quickly in this. Feedback has been really good. It's always a little interesting to learn a new tool, but we're getting a lot of great feedback about how well it's being received. And any questions?
How does the ERS project intersect with the QRIS efforts being taken as part of the study? Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so the question is, how are the ERS project, sorry, I'm trying to read, project intersect with the QRIS efforts being undertaken as part of the PDG? There's an alignment process there, so we do have work groups that are going to start in October to look at the framework for QRIS. this effort is really around how we'll do the on-site assessments, and so it'll happen in parallel. Right. Any other questions? Oh, are those trainings for ERS 3 open to register for in Denver? Right now, those trainings are available only for our credentialed coaches. So we've sent out multiple communications to that group. If you're a credentialed coach, you would have gotten it multiple times by now. We will be working this fall to create some online programming for providers to be able to access and get familiar with those tools as well as the coaches helping to support the providers. The list of trainings available were sent to the credentialed coaches, and I didn't mention yet, but it's Clayton Early Learning who's in partnership with us doing this work. So if there's whoever, I'm not sure who asked the question, Maria, you're welcome to send me an email, and I'll get you any information that I can as far as that is concerned. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for presenting. Thanks, Karen. That was a ton of information for folks to hear. So before we move on and have our wrap up with Lindsay, just want to give folks a minute or two. If you have any questions about the different projects happening within PDG, type those in, and we've got our whole team of experts here. So would love to take a few minutes and answer those. There was one question that came up around the transitions work and the coordination around transitions work within Human Services and then Department of Education. Lindsay?
Yep, so we have included the P3 office on our implementation team. So both Angie, who's the director of the P3 office, and Heidi McClaughlin, who helps run state preschool as well as 619 Part B programs, do participate in those meetings. We've also been having a series of meetings with that team to start having discussions about where we can start bridging between the two offices, especially as we look at transitions that prepare kids to enter kindergarten and be successful in those classrooms.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions on any of the great work that you just heard about from our PDG team?
Yep, and this is just a small sample. There's a lot going on. So we're excited about what's being done today and looking forward to sharing more as we continue to forge ahead. Do you have another slide? Oh, nope. So just some reminders. Again, we do have a web page set up. And that's where we're posting all the information about engagement opportunities, meetings, ways to stay in touch with the project, including contact information and newsletter sign up. So as we talk about surveys and distributing information and opportunities for populations to come and be part of this work, make sure you're checking that page and also signing up for the newsletter, because that's how you'll be able to stay in touch and learn about ways to come into those activities. So if there aren't any other questions, we can move on to Carrie.
Hi, this is Letty again. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Oh, good. Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks to Lindsay and the whole PDG team. This is wonderful to be able to have this on a webinar and to reach and inform so many people. So thanks for everyone for your guidance, for sharing, and it really helps that PQA is informed. Thanks so much. So Carrie, we're turning to you for the new guidelines. So it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Letty. I'll wait for my slides to, excuse me, get pulled up. So
I am happy to be able to present where we are with our updated early learning and development guidelines. And it's been a great process, and a lot of wonderful people and stakeholders, part of the PQA, have been involved in this and beyond to help us update these guidelines. I'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. So just as a reminder, this is only one component of the PDG plan to promote and increase parent and caregiver involvement, and to provide additional information to support them in supporting their children's development, as well as supporting transitions throughout early childhood. And so we're building off of certainly all of the great work that has been done locally and nationally as well to do this update. And just as a reminder as well, so this is an update, and I say update throughout because this wasn't meant to be a overhaul or a complete redo, because the guidelines were certainly well received, and a great deal of time and effort went into developing the 2011 guidelines. They were based in research, and we had a number of experts at the state level and national level weigh in and develop those. And so the intent, again, was not to totally redo the guidelines. So you really shouldn't see sweeping changes in the guidelines if you had a chance to look at them. I mean, it's really a lot of minor updates to bring them more into alignment with some particular areas of research that have developed since 2011, as well as to bring them into alignment with the 2015 Early Learning and Outcomes Framework with Head Start, and also the recently updated Colorado Academic Standards. So again, just to remind you that we did take your feedback along the way, that I have been here at multiple meetings to kind of share our progress and what we were struggling with as a small group advisory that has been pulled together with subject matter experts that were also meeting at the same time. And so we brought all of our questions to this larger program called an alignment committee to get your input along the way in terms of what research we should be considering and what transitions we should be considering, as well as any other updates we need to be thinking about or along the way. So, and to the best of our ability, we were able to incorporate your feedback into this update. It may be hard to see. There are, like I said, some of these are very minor, subtle updates throughout the guidelines. If you pay close attention to some of the words, just how some things were very changed subtly. And so again, your feedback has definitely been incorporated, and it's definitely made them a more well-rounded and I think enhanced, I would say, version of what we already had from 2011. In terms of the research-based updates, so these are the primary areas that I would say were updated based on recent research. A lot of this information will be found in narrative format. If you recall, or if you're familiar with the guidelines, there's a narrative that introduces the birth through 4 months section, and then also some narrative for each of the particular early learning domains at the very beginning, and then some brief narratives at each age group as well. And so the early brain development shows up quite heavily in the narrative portion. We talked a bit more about what was included in a summary report that was also sent out by Christina if you wanted to know a little bit more about the details there. Language development, we talked about moving beyond the research of Hart and Risley in terms of frequency of words that children hear, and more about the interaction and the back and forth conversation. And we enhanced that not just in the narratives, but throughout when you see supports and examples of what children or supports of what adults may be able to do to support children in developing particular skills. We really try to enhance that and place some emphasis on having those back and forth conversations and those building those healthy kind of parent-child, adult-child interactions. Physical health and development, we brought in much more information related to nutrition There wasn't a lot of information related to nutrition in the previous guidelines. So you'll see that represented, as well as a lot more specific guidance in terms of how adults might support children in development of particular routines and healthy habits as well. So that's in there. I would say the primary updates that are research-based happened in the birth through 36 months age section. Play, we've just emphasized throughout the importance of how children learn through play, and that play is a really developmentally appropriate way for children to learn. And so it's just, again, very subtle words included within where adults might be supporting learning and development within that cognitive development domain of that birth through 36 months age section. Again, throughout, you're going to see a lot more emphasis on interaction of adults and children and the importance of that interaction to support all domains of learning, and then social and emotional development as well. Again, some additional research infused throughout. So we also, as I mentioned, one of the primary goals was to bring this up to date with the 2015 Early Learning Outcomes Framework that is used by Head Start programs. And so here you just see a screenshot of the domains that are part of the ELOF. It's pretty cool. You go to their website if you want to know more. Those are interactive. You can just click right on the domains and drill down a little bit further. And if you're familiar with the 2011 version, the pre-K age group is anchored on the Head Start framework. And so we wanted to continue that anchoring and enhance it as well, because if you're familiar with the changes between the previous Early Learning Outcomes Framework and this 2015 version, some things were lost actually in this update, but we kept. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. So some of the primary alignment updates you see here were in approaches to learning. Again, a lot of this was in the birth to 36 months. I should have put 36 months on the last two bullets there, sorry. Physical health and development domain and social and emotional domain. So saw some updates based on the ELOF update. What was not changed based on the ELOF update were social studies, logic and reasoning, English language development, and creative arts expression, because the 2015 ELOF no longer has specific domains so devoted to these areas. You'll see them somewhat spread throughout the other central domains that they have listed. But it was important for us to keep them because, again, this wasn't meant to be a major overhaul, a total redo of the guidelines. And so we didn't want providers or others who were using this in the field to kind of be thrown aback if domains were completely gone, and we didn't have enough time to really decide whether what was appropriate or not. As well as we wanted to stay in alignment and prepare children for the Colorado academic standards, and certainly the Colorado academic standards include they're referred to as visual arts, performing the visual arts. So the creative arts expression domain stays to stay in alignment with the Colorado academic standards, as well as social studies and English language development, and then our logic and reasoning as well feeds up into actually all of the Colorado academic standards, if you recall from the previous version. So other general updates that were based on the ELOF, just wanted to mention, you'll see some, like I said, minor wording changes. When appropriate, we added language where their children are demonstrating an understanding and with support from adults. Just recognizing that children may be able to do more than we think with some scaffolding, or they may be able to demonstrate and not necessarily verbalize or their understanding. So we changed a little bit of the language to make it it's very subtle. So you'll see some more demonstrates and with support from adults throughout. And also, when appropriate, we added additional examples of child behaviors. If you're familiar with the guidelines, you know that we have the indicators. If you're picturing the 3 columns, we have the indicators, we have examples of what a child may or may not do, and then we have how adults might support children's development for those indicators. And so you'll see some additional examples and some additional supports, bringing, I would say, more specificity and a little bit more specific guidance for people that are using the guidelines. And I don't think it was particularly, I wouldn't say it's in particular domain or another. And we really tried to not go overboard with that, recognizing that there already were 136 pages and that we couldn't provide a child development course within the guidelines. But there were some areas that we wanted to provide some more specific guidance. So you'll see some of that. And we really tried to rein ourselves in a little bit on that. In terms of what was updated based off of the recently updated Colorado Academic Standards, so primarily you'll see some updates in literacy, math, science, social studies, and then creative arts expression, just to bring us better into alignment. So I would say that these are, again, enhanced domains. It wasn't, nothing was lost or cut, but instead I would say enhanced. We took the same approach as we did in 2011, where if it was present in Head Start, that was the anchor again, if it was in the framework. And it aligned with Colorado Academic Standards, great. But if there were things in the academic standards that were not present in Head Start, those were also included. So again, I would say the pre-K age group is like Head Start enhanced in order to really make sure that we have that vertical alignment and horizontal, of course, because academic standards are pre-K as well. So again, you're not going to see sweeping changes, just a few things here and there. And as I note here, that social studies and creative arts expression are not in the ELOF at all. And so these are pretty much verbatim straight from Colorado Academic Standards. So because we didn't obviously not want to lose those domains just because the ELOF no longer has dedicated space for those two domains. Again, this an update, not an overhaul. And so in the K through third grade section continues to be a narrative representation because those already exist on CDE's website, and we didn't want to waste, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper when people can just go and refer to the Colorado Academic Standards instead. So instead, similar to what was there before, you see the narrative that provides the connection from the 3 to 5 age group and how that supports and leads up to what children are learning in K through 3. So there's definitely some updates in there because there were changes to the Colorado Academic Standards. So you'll see some updates in that narrative, some specific domains. Maybe the language was changed a little bit, and there's some different subdomains, if you will, or grade level expectations, I should say, in the Colorado Academic Standards. So again, but it's pretty subtle. Some things were not changed at all, because again, I should also mention that the Colorado Academic Standards were aligned to the guidelines when they did this update, and it was approved in 2018. And then finally, the English language domain continues to draw from the WIDA standards and TESOL as well. So just as Colorado Academic Standards do. So that is kind of the big picture for those update components. And then you also will see, if we move on to the next slide, throughout the narrative at the very beginning, we struggled with where we wanted to put this within the guidelines, and ultimately it really doesn't matter because there will be a communication vendor, or there is a communication vendor on board, itching to get this information, I think, whose job will be to make this user-friendly and approachable and represented in different ways online and interactive and in print form. So the actual print form of these guidelines may or may not look like what you see now. I don't think it will, actually. So at the end of the day, we're like, okay, it doesn't really matter where right now we have this transition content within the guidelines, because somebody whose job it is to communicate information will do a better job at figuring out where it goes. So, but you do see the content represented. And again, we asked you all for your input on which transitions should be included. And these are the primary ones we landed on. So hospital to home, infant to toddler, home to school, that Part C to B transition and coordination, and then home or school to kindergarten. So those kindergarten transitions we were just talking about. Daily transitions do appear, but we didn't want to call them out specifically. Instead, they're really just embedded throughout the guidelines in the suggested support suggestions sections. And then additional transitions that we included, if you go on to the next slide, that we thought were also important to make sure everyone was aware of, if you go on to the next one. So while we didn't call these out in as great of a detail as the previous ones, we wanted to make sure they were included and that whoever were using these guidelines are aware that though we as adults may not think of these as transitions or think it's a big deal for children, that they're important, and children can have those same varied reactions, emotional and behavioral reactions, when they're going through these types of transitions as well. So when a teacher changes, or adults in their caregiving setting change, or even if it's from academic year to an after-school program. So just being aware that that's a transition for a child if it's where we're changing adults and we're changing settings. So these stressed or atypical, so mid-year multiple relocations, whether that's for a job or if for transient homeless populations or migrant populations, expulsions as well. Seasonal transitions, so school breaks as well. I think parents, we may not think of this as a hard transition for kids, but maybe it's harder for parents sometimes to have kids back and out and back and forth. But again, we wanted to call attention to these as transitions where you may not think about them as adults as being important, but for children, again, it can be anytime a change is experienced, a loss of routine, you can see those same sorts of emotional and behavioral reactions. And then certainly transitions that happen when children are living with separated parents. So simple things like drop-offs and pick-up at a school are different depending upon who is picking up a child or dropping a child off. And again, we may think that's very routine, but it still can be really challenging for children to experience. And so, there's so much information that's been written on this that we didn't want to, reinvent the wheel or rewrite, or we didn't feel like we were creating something new. Instead, it was about bringing awareness to the fact that these transitions are felt and experienced by children differently, and as also experienced by families differently. That is included in the narrative as well. And then we've talked about some general supports that providers can put in place to support children and families through transitions, or things that families can do to support children during transition, and as well as provide some specific resources. So, I think we probably could have had an endless list of resources in there, and I think that at some point we just decided that we had to kind of just cut it off and really focus in our content a bit more. So that's what the transition content looks like, and it's represented within the narrative section before you get into the indicators and examples and supports and whatnot. So now, feedback. And so we definitely we're kind of at the stage again where we've had lots of rounds of review, opportunities for input along the way from yourselves and from our small group advisory. And so and again, not an overtool. This was an enhancement, not sweeping changes. And so we really, we think about it as an enhancement. So if there's anything, though, that is high level, so if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, yes, we want to know that. We don't want to know that you don't like this word on page 50 and we should change it because we're not at the wordsmithing level at all. We don't want to, we're not talking about this indicator should be changed to this or that. So formatting kinds of questions or issues or suggestions, we'll take those. Again, I mentioned there's a communication vendor who is charged with making this pretty and approachable and hopefully interactive on the web. And, you can look at it. It'll be mobile friendly as well. And we will definitely take any suggestions you may have for how to make that happen, and we'll pass that on to the communication vendor. And there's some things that are just going to be beyond the current scope of this project. It was, we had a short amount of time and just some very specific charges in terms of those updates. And so we really weren't looking to make those sweeping changes, like considering if the infant toddler age group should be redone. So that's not on the table right now, but we want to know if you think that's important. We'll keep track of that for a later point in time when a much broader update refresh can happen, and certainly not major content changes or additions. Again, in 2011, we spent over a year really digging into research and what other states were doing to develop these guidelines. And I think if there was a suggestion for new content or major content changes, we'd want to do that same due diligence to make sure it's supported by research and what are other states doing. And again, that just wasn't, we don't have time for that right now, and it wasn't really the purpose. And we also, again, felt like the 2011 version, very well received, being used widely right now, didn't want to make a lot of big changes to disrupt the use or other things that providers and others may have aligned to the guidelines. So having said all of that, if you do have feedback, we definitely love to hear.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. So this is Christina. I would encourage folks to, that was so much information, and wow, you guys have done a ton of work in a very short amount of time. So thank you to you, and thank you to all the working group members that really took a lot of time to do the deep dive here. In just a few minutes, we'll be asking for the PQA members to vote on whether they support moving these forward and recommending that the ECLC adopt these updates into the early learning development guidelines for the state and endorse that as our state's updated version of these ELDGs. Again, like Carrie said, this wasn't a complete overhaul, a redo, but was meant to really make sure that we're current with practice, we're current with research, we're aligned, and really have and continue to have a strong set of guidelines for children, for families, and for providers in our state that are working with kids. So I'm looking at the chat here and would love for people to share any of those high-level questions, comments. Do you like the direction? Is there anything that didn't make sense? Let's take a few minutes for that, and then in just a moment, I will ask our PQA members to submit their yes or no vote on whether to move these forward. I'm starting to see some votes coming in already, which is great. So go ahead and do that too if you're ready. But looking for any comments, questions, anything for discussion before we do that. I'm seeing some comments that so far the updates look good. There's a question about the document for review. The overview that Carrie mentioned that went through the high-level updates, I think it was a 15-page document or so, was sent out on Monday to everyone, as well as the link to the entire, I think it's 142 pages right now, that document. So that was all sent out on Monday. And I sent that link again this morning, a revised link for the whole document. So folks should have had a chance to review that and take a look at that. We're still just looking, we're all looking at the screen for questions and comments coming in, so please keep them coming.
Yeah, and I want to share Pamela Harris's comment. She said, great work to Carrie. She appreciates the thoughtfulness and attention to detail, continuity with the intent of the original intended learning guidelines. Carrie and team, thank you for your work on that.
Thanks.
Sophia says aligning the ELDG with the Head Start ELOF will be useful to communicate with families because the language is easy for parents to understand.
Thank you. I know Eileen, who was on our small group advisory, had a question or a comment related to, because yes, I mean the guidelines, though throughout we do have language within examples, child examples, and supports that what about if it's not a child's not typically developing, and what you might expect instead, but we do have we also have some narrative as well that, again, talks about this may not necessarily happen within this 36 months, perhaps, like a time frame when a child is developing. And I think, Eileen, maybe what your comment will be addressed more, because I should also mention there was a companion piece to this project that won't appear in the guidelines, but would appear within perhaps just the website that the communication vendor creates, that'll be around naming parent experiences. And part of the parent experience content will include, or does include, based off your all's input as well as the small group advisory's input, things like when you have a concern, and when, what sort of like those milestones, what to expect, when to expect it, and, who to ask if you're not seeing these things. And so, Eileen, I think maybe your question there in terms of, what providing the additional information related to what to expect from a child that doesn't have a typical development, and then providing those resources of who to talk to or where to go for that information. I think that will hopefully address your comment, but we can definitely talk more about it offline to make sure we have that information in there that you're looking for. I can't, I'm like squinting.
There's a question around appreciating the updates and supporting endorsement, so thank you. But the question that goes along with that is how the material would be aligned with partners who are using in the field. So Vroom or Bright by Text are examples of partners who have in the past taken language and information and shared that through the tools and resources they have. I believe that part of this will be a communication out to those providers to make sure that they have the updated guidelines and can update their content to make sure that it is reflecting back. So when it does say this tip aligns with the guidelines, that we have that, and we can highlight the additional content or new content around transitions and the parent experience pieces and things like that. So that's a great point, Joyce, around making sure that we're communicating these out to the people that are using these within their programs and their products. So we'll make sure to note that. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, I don't see any more comments or questions, so thank you all for those. Those were great. Let's take a few moments here and ask for all of our members, if you have not submitted a vote, if you can please type either yes or no into the chat box. If you're unclear if you're a member, I also sent that list out on Monday, so you can refer back to that to see who the membership is. Those members were appointed by the full ECLC about 8 months ago now, I think, whenever this started, January. So please refer to that if you have questions. But we'll take a few minutes, ask you to type in either yes or no to whether you support moving these updates and changes forward to the Commission to endorse as Colorado's new revised set of ELDGs, Early Learning and Development Guidelines. Everyone take a few minutes and send in your votes, please. Have some cool music or something.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
Big milestone.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to close the voting here in about 15 seconds. So if you have not voted, please type in either yes or no into the chat box. And then we have been keeping a tally here, and so we'll share that in about 12 seconds now. So make sure you're typing in either yes or no into that chat box. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all for voting, for sharing your comments. I'm excited that this has been approved and passed by our committee, so congratulations, and thank you, Carrie. Thank you. Yes. to all the members of the work group that worked so hard to get us here. This is really exciting, and I think really puts us ahead of a lot of states in terms of making sure that they have really solid guidelines for parents, for families, and for providers to use. So next steps with this work, we will bring it to the full commission. That meeting is on August 22nd. So if you have any additional comments or questions or want to know just more about the process, feel free to reach out. But thank you all, and thanks, Carrie, for walking through this process with us.
Great, thank you.
All right. Next up, excited to welcome Jennifer and Stacy to talk with us about the Early Childhood Professional Credential Working Group and the recommendations that have come from that. So I know we have Jennifer on the line. If we can make sure that Jennifer's unmuted, and we'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacy Kennedy. I'm the Director for Child Care Quality Initiatives here at the Office of Early Childhood, and we're excited today to talk about progress that's been made. If you can go just back one slide, Reese, that'd be great. Talk about one of 4 work groups that we're conducting as part of the best practice activities with the Preschool Development Grant. These work group activities are really intended to focus on kind of foundational aspects of the system. So specifically Colorado Shines, the competencies, looking at workforce qualifications and that pathway for educators in Colorado. And then the work group that I will be talking about today is the Early Childhood Professional Credential work group, which really was focused on an area of the 2020 workforce plan where we have really made a commitment to ensuring that we're creating clear, understandable, aligned pathways for educators, early childhood educators in our state. This work happened with the support of Government Performance Solutions, and then is led by a core team, which includes myself, Karen Rosa, who's the Director for Child Care Licensing, Jennifer O'Brien, who will be joining the presentation here in a few slides, and she is the Workforce Development Director at Educator Talent at the Colorado Department of Education. And then in addition to the core group, we are pleased to have Angela Ben-Zachary, who is the Workforce Coordinator, Alignment Coordinator with the Preschool Development Grant. So hopefully I got that right, Angela. We like long titles around here, so next slide. So for today, we're going to really kind of provide an overview of the comprehensive nature of this project. Like, why did we focus on this area specifically? What are the constraints that we faced? Who was involved? What are the recommended changes? And then we'll go into kind of what are the next steps and provide information for who you can contact if you have additional questions. Next slide. So this is a little disclaimer. Lindsay, you should be super proud. Just for the Preschool Development Grant, so we can kind of skip over this, but this was specific to Colorado's effort. It doesn't reflect the federal Office of Child Care, and we appreciate the funding to do this important work. So next slide. So the first question we want to address is why are changes coming? And so again, we wanted to focus on really looking at both qualifications within child care licensing, as well as the Early Childhood Professional Credential, which both represent pathways for individuals to become qualified based on child care rule.
but also have noted differences and opportunities for alignment. So this group really looked very specifically at those recommendations and kind of took a very deep dive process-wise. I would say this was very intense work, and many of the work group members I've seen their names up on the call, and it just was a very exciting, intense effort, both on the part of the work groups, but also on the part of the expert group and our national kind of consultants. So we'll go into the details and how those different groups were involved. Again, just reiterating kind of the Workforce 2020 plan, and that kind of being something that we wanted to address and use as a guide to this work. So specifically, what we wanted to achieve is to elevate an awareness and appreciation of both early childhood education and the professionals who make a lifelong impact on children. We wanted to ensure that all early childhood educators have the skills and expertise necessary to serve children from a variety of cultures, backgrounds, and abilities. And we also wanted to provide equitable and accessible opportunities to pursue authentic professional development and honor career accomplishments that are valued by the field. So as we approached this work, we also acknowledged that there were some constraints. The credential specifically is supported through a scoring engine within the Colorado Shines Professional Development Information System. So we knew whatever recommendations that that actually would require a change would result or need to result in an enhancement in that system. We also know that the system has its own limitations in how it can function based on the platform that it sits on, and that there would still need to be support from staffing to verify different components of the scoring logic, and so we had to keep that that staffing need or human resources element in mind. In addition, we knew we had limited time to request the enhancements, and that's for a couple reasons. The first reason is we wanted to leverage some of the preschool development grant funds to support these enhancements, so there's a limitation there. In addition, we know that there has been, a lot of interest in how we as a state better support our early childhood educators, and most recently through the passing of House Bill 1005, we have an educator tax credit that will come into place for the 2020 calendar year. So just really wanting any changes to occur prior to that that tax credit going into effect, if at all feasible. So that really accelerated the work of this particular work group, and we're in the process, just so you know, to get a level of effort from the vendor that supports that platform to better understand kind of what we'll be able to move forward with quickly, and and what we might need to kind of pace a little bit differently. So who was involved? We sent out an application to those individuals that are part of the Preschool Development Grant newsletter. We sent out an application to all of you with the Program Quality and Alignment, the Early Childhood Professional Development Work Group, as well as licensed providers across the state.
And in addition, anyone that had contacted me or any of the other team members indicating their interest. So if you'll go to the next slide, Therese. We selected the group really based on some key stakeholders, and we wanted both specific constituencies as well as geographic representation. And we have a slide, I won't go into detail because we have a nice graphic in the next slide that really kind of shows exactly who those folks were. In addition, we were able to involve many experts, both at the national level and those that we're fortunate enough here to have in the state. So some examples of that was Denise Mazzi, who was involved really with a lot of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, and she does international consulting now with a specific focus on workforce development. She also focuses on quality rating and improvement systems. We included Diana Shack with the University of Colorado, Denver. Gosh, I mean, now I'm going to blank out, but there were just a number of interviews that were held just to be sure we get this right. And then, as I mentioned, in addition, we tried to engage all of those users with that are currently in the Colorado Shines Professional Development Information System or the Child Care License programs, and we conducted a survey in between the two work group sessions just to be sure that the recommendations were something that individuals were in agreement with, or we could understand cases where they weren't, if that were the case. So next slide. So the representative work group included teachers and directors, and child care centers, early childhood councils. We had higher education representation, school districts. We had the two state agencies that really work to support early childhood educators in partnership, the Colorado Department of Human Services, Colorado Department of Education, and this group really comprised the credential work group. And as I mentioned, these folks really committed a lot of their time. It was 6 full days of work sessions, and it was intense. Next slide. So with the experts and the researchers, again, we really wanted to take a broader look at other perceptions from a national perspective, any risks or benefits that we could learn from the larger field, and then again, we were able to kind of have them call in or have individual interviews with these folks to probe in on specific questions from the group. So the leading researchers, we, as I mentioned, include Diana Shack, who's very involved in this space with her own research, and then Denise Mazzi. So next slide. I think I got ahead of myself. So the first work group was really about kind of reviewing the areas of opportunity and then gathering questions that in the week between we could better understand. And one of the things that I think everyone really wanted to ensure was that we also included the field and had a chance to kind of check their pulse. So over a very short period, I think it was less than a week, we sent out a survey and we received almost 1,600 responses. 75% of those responses were from directors, early childhood teachers, or assistant early childhood teachers, and then 25% of the responses were from family child care home providers or other professionals, and that those typically were kind of our local partners that are supporting the educators or programs at locally. So early childhood councils would be a good example of that. The survey was intended to determine the importance of key improvement suggestions that had been identified within that first work session. And so it looked at 4 different things. Those goals of the early childhood professional credential, the extent to which individuals were in agreement with how those were stated and the importance of those goals, the point allocation, expiration timelines for ongoing professional development and higher education coursework and degrees, all of which are components of the early childhood professional credential and inform the scoring for that credential. And then the alignment, the importance of there even being alignment between child care licensing personnel qualifications and the early childhood professional credential requirements. And then finally, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to gain a better understanding for the user experience within the Colorado Shines Professional Development Information System. So the survey feedback, the respondents agreed that the suggestions offered by the group are important. And this was really, I think, confirming. Generally, 80% or more of the respondents agreed on the work group suggestions as important or highly important for consideration. There was one exception, the point allocation for college coursework as compared to ongoing professional development for high-value training such as Pyramid Plus and the expanding quality in infant toddler care. There were only 67% of respondents agreed on the importance of this option. Thank you. Can you go back just one more? Thanks, Teresa. In addition, respondents took time and sometimes very extensively to provide a lot of kind of qualitative information. And so we had over 700 comments that were provided. And we are taking time to kind of go through those very specifically to gain a better understanding of what we can learn from that. Next slide. So now I think, let me just double check my notes here. I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer O'Brien to talk a little more about how the group came up with the recommendations. And Jennifer, I just want to be sure you are unmuted.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So I'm Jennifer O'Brien. I'm the Director of Early Childhood Workforce Development over at the Colorado Department of Education. And so, as you might imagine, we did a lot of work around changing the way the points are awarded in the credential. And I'm going to walk you through some of those proposed changes. So next slide, please. Thank you. So obviously we focused on simplifying and reducing the complexity of the credential. We've been hearing a lot of feedback about problems that are related to this. We wanted to make the points that are awarded for different professional development more equitable and fair. And then, of course, we want to still keep encouraging professionals to continuously grow and learn in their career. So first, I'll talk to you about the things that are remaining the same. So we're keeping the 100-point scale. We're also keeping the 4 pathways. So as a reminder, those 4 pathways to earn points in early childhood professional credential are formal education, ongoing professional development, experience, and then a 4th pathway that we call demonstrated competencies. So we the 100-point scale really applies to formal ed, OPD, and experience, and then we're keeping the demonstrated competency area as 10 bonus points. We're keeping the same point caps for the 3 main pathways, which are 50 points for formal education, 30 points for ongoing professional development, and then 20 points for experience. And then, as we have been doing for the past few years, points awarded for degrees do not expire. So here is a table that really does a good job of summarizing the changes that we want to make to the formal education pathway. So the first column, you'll see all of the degrees that we accept. And then the second column details the amount of points that they currently earn. And then columns 3 through 5 detail the proposed changes. So there was a desire to make formal education, there was a desire to increase how we recognized formal education in the credential. So you'll see that there is a column, the third column has to do with points for ECE degrees specifically. The fourth column talks about ECE-related degrees, so degrees that aren't full early childhood degrees, but there's a lot of overlap. And then the last column is all other degrees besides ECE degrees and ECE-related degrees. So actually, Therese, would you mind going back to the formal education slide? Thank you. So one thing I want to point out is that the group had very strong feelings that there should be no expiration for formal education coursework, so that will change. We're also eliminating area of study points because that concept is covered in how we decided to recognize degrees in the table that you see on this slide. We also wanted to add a new category called trainings of special recognition at 2 points each, and these points will not expire, okay? So with the points awarded for ECE and ECE-related degrees, we will not be reviewing and data entering specific information about specific courses. One thing that we really knew that we wanted to do with this is make the process more streamlined so that our turnaround time would decrease and people could know their credential level faster than they are currently. So we will review, go back to that formal education slide. There's a lot of information on this slide. So we will be reviewing early childhood coursework outside of a degree. So this is important because as people are working towards a degree, they will get points. And then any early childhood coursework that they take after earning a degree, they will earn points. So that's an important piece to note. We decided to get rid of, if any of you are familiar with, we had different point allocations for aligned and non-aligned coursework, and that meant aligned to Colorado's competencies for early childhood educators and administrators. The feeling was that that penalizes people, so we got rid of that. And then we're still discussing how many points we're going to award to early childhood related courses. So we'll be following up with you when we make a decision about that. Okay, now Therese, we can go on to that OPD, the next slide. Good, thank you. So when professionals earn ongoing professional development points, we have 3 tiers. And you'll see those tiers described in the first 2 columns of this chart. This is a difficult one for people to understand. It's difficult for us to explain. So what the group decided to do is just award a 0.5 point per hour of clock hour training. this just makes it much simpler, much easier. Let's see. We're also evaluating, there was a section of this pathway around qualifying credentials, licenses, and endorsements. This also added, while people felt that it's good that some of these get recognized, it adds an enormous amount of complexity to the credential. And so what the group decided to do is streamline this list. And so we will, as we move along with this revision, we'll be communicating with everyone about what that streamlined list looks like. Points related to professional development delivered as a series, or professional development that centers around children with high needs, and then professional development that includes a job-embedded component. They will just get points for hours. The extra points related to those features of any given training will no longer apply. So this slide, I think it might need to be worked on a bit and clarified. I know that the group really wanted to move away from tiers, and what this slide is showing you is tiers related to CEUs. So this is something I'm going to circle back around with the committee because I'm not sure that this is exactly where we landed, and then we'll, communicate that in future meetings. So our experience pathway. This is an area where we did a lot of aligning with licensing, right? Because it was difficult for people to navigate the different requirements around experience for the early childhood professional credential and licensing. We are going to eliminate the experience worksheet. This is difficult for people to fill out. It's difficult for our reviewers to review. And so we are hoping to build an interface that captures the same information in the professional development information system. Also, experience is going to be verified in the same way as it is for licensing. So we will need letters, licenses, that sort of thing to verify an individual's experience. Family child care centers will cap out at 50 hours of experience per week. Center experience will cap out at 60 hours per week. And the difference there is there's someone who can verify experience at 60 hours for center-based care, where there's, in most situations, there's nobody to verify that. It's, the family child care provider is just showing us their license, and so we decided to go with a standard 40 hours per week, and licensing will align with those as well. Changes to the demonstrated competency pathway. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a streamlined list of credentials, licenses, and endorsements, and that piece will move over to this pathway in all likelihood. And then the demonstrated competency points currently expire after 1 year. And just really valuing simplicity in communication, the group decided that 3 years was the most appropriate, because it aligns with 3-year expiration date on the credential and 3-year expiration for ongoing professional development. Okay, go ahead. So the changes that we're thinking about, we are going to test current professionals, basically run their information through the new proposed scoring engine to see what effect it will have on levels. Because obviously we don't want this earth-shaking change in the credential, so we just really want to evaluate how that looks. As part of the work leading up to this stakeholder work group, we did a crosswalk between personnel requirements in childcare licensing and the credential. We'll redo that crosswalk. And then there's really a commitment to making sure that the things that are available within the credential are really relevant to people who use the professional credential.
Jennifer, this is Christina, and we have about 5 minutes left in total. So if you would mind jumping through so that we have some time for questions at the end from folks.
Sure. So some other changes that were proposed, user interface changes. So creating a dashboard that really details current points they might need in the future. And then also we're thinking about strengthening in-app help in the credential portion of the PDIS to really help people be successful when they apply for a credential. Okay, one more. So, you know, all of this, we want to see a decreased level of complexity. We want to have stronger alignment with licensing. We want to kind of make better the equity of how points are awarded, have the PDIS be more user-friendly and easier for professionals to manage their credential. And then all the while, of course, we want to help EC professionals continuously grow and learn in their career. So now we're kind of thinking a lot about the feasibility of the recommendations. And then once the recommendations are confirmed, we'll be developing an implementation plan, and then which involves a communication plan. So you can keep an eye on these things to make sure that you're up to date on our revision progress, the Colorado Shines Brighter webpage, the PDIS What's New webpage. That link is a direct link. If you want to access it by the home page, you'll have to scroll down a little bit. So that's what that red note is all about. Okay, next one. And then you can contact any one of us about any comments, questions, etc. Feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to answer and explain and listen and all that stuff. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Let's take a few minutes just for folks if they want to write in any comments or questions. You can see the contact information on the screen as well. So plenty of ways to follow up if you want to dig in on specific areas. But let's take a minute or two for comments or questions. I see a comment that came in that it was a great experience to work on the work group. So I know it was a lot of work, but congratulations on getting all of that work done, and thanks to everybody that did that. What will this experience look like for those who are not in the class?
So, Jennifer, I'm not sure if you can see the questions, but there is a question regarding experience and what that will look like for those who are not in a classroom.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a great question. So the credential is still going to keep the broader definition of experience. Karen, Rosa, and I talked this through. And because the credential has a slightly different purpose, or maybe an additional purpose than licensing requirements, we're going to still keep our definition of, you know, direct care of children, supervisory experience, training experience, coaching experience, and research experience. So there are opportunities in the credential for people not in the classroom to earn points.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts? All right, awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing all this. It's incredible
Thank
work.
you, everybody.
How this goes, and then 3 additional working groups coming up that folks have the application for. So
yeah, and I just wonder, Angela, do you want to give a time frame for the applications out? So if people are interested in applying, do you want to give details for that?
Yes. So actually, Christina was nice enough to send out an email earlier this week to everybody announcing the next 3 work groups. So it's only 1 application for all 3, and you're able to apply to every single one in some capacity, whether you'd like to be a direct work group member or if you'd like to function as an expert resource. And the difference is those work group members will be in the room for several intensive days to discuss the 3 areas that we'll be working on. The expert resources will function in a separate capacity, so they will work to maybe provide information via survey or interviews or focus groups to really help inform the work group on some of the questions that may come out of those sessions and really guide them and make sure that we get to conclusions and recommendations that fit for the state of Colorado. So you can go through and apply. It will be closing on Wednesday at close of business. Next Wednesday is the 13th. Let me double check that just to make sure that I'm saying the right date. I'm sorry, it's going to be Tuesday the 13th. That's what the 13th was. So it's Tuesday the 13th is when it'll be closing at 5 p.m. So please do apply to the group. Since it's a less than 10-minute application, you can go in, put your contact information, what your position is like, your responsibilities. So we're looking for representation from a wide group of folks from rural and urban areas, including Head Start, public schools, early childhood councils, centers, and family child care homes. So we want to make sure this is a broad group of stakeholders that are in the room for each of the 3 work groups. And then the same with that expert resource group so that we can go directly to folks who are invested in these areas and competencies. So we appreciate everyone's applications so far. We've had a great response, and please do share the invitation with your contacts as well. You're welcome to forward on the email that you received. And if you didn't receive the email or you seem to have lost it, please do let us know and we will send that back out again. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, Jennifer, and Stacy for that. I'm Amanda Pelletier, the Program Assistant for the Early Childhood Leadership Commission, and I'm just going to do a brief overview of Senate Bill 63. So my colleague, Christine Lang, and I have been working on the implementation of Senate Bill 63. The title of the bill is concerning a strategic action plan to address infant and family child care home shortages in Colorado. So next slide, please. Here's a little summary. The bill charges the Department of Human Services with consultation of the Early Childhood Leadership Commission and various stakeholders to study the reasons for and draft a strategic action plan addressing the decline of availability of family child care homes and infant care. And that strategic action plan is going to be submitted to the legislature by December 1st, 2019. So this slide illustrates the decline in Colorado for family child care homes. As you can see, all counties experience a drop in the number of licensed family child care homes from 2010 to 2018. The red indicates a decrease in 100 to 50%, and the orange, you can see, indicates a decrease in 49.9 to 1.1% decrease. Next slide. This is a slide that illustrates the decline in infant capacity from 2010 to 2018. You can see with a few exceptions, most counties have experienced a drop in licensed infant capacity. So this slide illustrates the relationship between family child care homes and infant care. As you can see, licensed capacity for infant care has dropped dramatically, direct in line with licensed homes, and family child care centers has remained stagnant, meaning as we lose licensed homes, we are also losing care for infants. Why this matters? It's very important work that we are doing. Family child care homes often are an essential part of the family child care network families rely on, especially for infant care and non-traditional hours. And then in some counties, there are no licensed centers, leaving family child care homes as the only option. The process. So we are working on studying the decline and the reasons why these shortages are happening. We are doing this by partnering with the preschool development vendors. There's been a few surveys that have gone out that have Senate Bill 63 questions embedded in them, so please pay attention to those surveys. They're very important to complete for both processes. We are also working with additional vendors to collect data called out in the bill and using internal OEC data. We have been, let me go back one more, sorry, still on the process. OEC and ECLC has been obtaining stakeholder input called out on these issues in the bill and taking possible recommendations for inclusion in the strategic action plan. So we've had a bunch of stakeholder meetings in July, including 2 great events that Raise hosted with us. So thank you again for that, and we've got some great input. We're continuing the stakeholder outreach this month, including developmenting a remote option toolkit where we are putting together a toolkit for groups or organizations to hold their own stakeholder meetings in their area to provide feedback on the bill. So we're going to try and finalize that this upcoming week. So more to come on that, and we'll get it to you as soon as it's available. In October, we will be reviewing all the proposed recommendations, so taking all the stakeholder feedback and compiling a long list of recommendations. We will still in the process. We're going to take this stakeholder feedback and create a survey and send it out to everyone who's engaged been engaged in this process, and basically we're going to collect feedback and scale on the survey the level of support for each recommendation and the impact. After we get those results back, we'll be taking those to a small group, and this small group will be finalizing the list of recommendations that will be part of the strategic action plan. Once we have that final list, we will be sending that back out via survey to the collected stakeholders, including all of you, to scale your overall support of the plan. Then in late October, November, we will be taking those final list of recommendations and having them costed out by the Cradle to Kindergarten team. And then we will be submitting the strategic plan in December 1st. So that is our basic process for the plan. Next slide, please. Here are a few of the issues addressed. This is just a summary from the bill, so including obstacles that are keeping families from getting licensed, reasons why providers stop operating, zoning, building tax, and other regulatory structures affecting family child care homes and infant care, resources available and needed to help family child care homes become and stay licensed. As you can see, we can move through them. And these are some of the stakeholders called out in the bill that we have been partnering with and will continue to partner with, including family child care homes and organizations representing them, counties, municipalities, business and economic development organizations, parents of infants, state and local early childhood advocacy and policy organizations, just to call out a few. And then next slide. And this is our timeline. So July, we started our stakeholder engagement process, and August, we're going to continue it. September is when we're completing all of our stakeholder outreach and taking all the data that we are gathering and the PDG folks are gathering and compiling that. October, we are developing the long list of recommendations, again, sending out that feedback to narrow that list down, then conveying the small group to determine the final recommendations. And in November, we're hoping to complete the strategic action plan, complete the costing out of the recommendations in December, we will be submitting the strategic action plan to the legislature. Any questions on that brief overview? And we'll be looking to do a small activity to dive more into this and collect feedback at the next program quality and alignment meeting in September. Any questions to us? All right. We will have a page on the OEC website that will have the toolkit, and then additionally we'll be sending it out via this email list, and Ray's, I think, will be sending it out, and we'll get it to you. There's a few strategies. Any other questions? The toolkit is not completed yet. We'll be hoping to send it out next week. So, all right. Thank you.
So, Christine, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, it's Letty again. So it's time for public comment and any other member updates. And Christina, I know you have one, and then we'll watch and see if anyone else has a public comment.
Perfect. So I do have one to share on behalf of Kristen Lang, who you have met on previous webinars. She's not able to be here today. I will read that in a second, but just a reminder for folks, if you have things that you want to share, public comments, things that are happening, either type those into the chat box or type into the chat box that you want to be unmuted, and then we can try and unmute your phone line. So go ahead and do that while I'm sharing this. But Kristen wanted to share that at the last Program Quality and Alignment meeting, we did an activity where we were looking at 2 different matrices and different programs and how those programs are aligned and connected. Folks put a lot of time and effort into helping to build out those matrices. But we didn't have a ton of time to dive into them, and there was some interest after the meeting to get together and to continue working on those and make sure they're really fleshed out and really good tools for the PDG work and then other work too that we do in the early childhood community. So Kristen wanted to just put the announcement out there that we're happy to find another time to bring folks together to dig into those. We're suggesting that our September meeting will be in person and that we could stay an extra hour after that meeting if that worked for folks. For anybody who really wanted to dive in and help expand and build those out even further. So you can either email me or you can email Kristen. It's Kristen, KRISTEN.Lang, L-A-N-G, at state.co.us. Or you can follow back up with me. This is Christina when I send the email out after the meeting here. And just let us know if you're interested, and then we'll follow up and see if that time will work for folks. So that is my one update. Any updates or public comments come in through the chat? Doesn't look like it. All right. Anyone in the room here have anything else you want to share? Any last minute notes? Anything to provide for the group? All right. Wonderful. Well, we will get the minutes out to folks to take a look at. We had 62 people joining us on the webinar, so we won't go through and read everyone's name, but just appreciate everyone taking the time to be here. We'll send out the webinar, the materials, some of the reminders that you heard today, and just encourage everyone to stay involved, keep sharing everything with your networks. It's really making a huge difference, and we appreciate your time and your attention to all this great work. Letty, I'll turn it to you for any other follow-ups from ECLC.
Okay, thanks to everyone. This was a great meeting, wonderful update. And if there are no objections through chat, we will adjourn with one caveat, which is any ideas for agenda topics for future meetings, please send to Christina, and we will incorporate those in the meetings, both either the webinar or the in-person. I look forward to seeing everyone in September, on September 13th, 9 to 11. Where is that meeting going to be, Christina? Do you know?
We are still working to lock down a location. We've been moving around and trying different spots to try and make sure we have the best audio. So we'll let everyone know as soon as we have that confirmed.
That's great. And with no objections, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.